I am Daniel Carcillo. I played 10 years in the NHL, retired early because of 7 diagnosed concussions, was diagnosed with mild dementia, and saved my life with psychedelic-assisted medicines. And I'm optimistic for the future because these medicines have an innate ability to cure us rather than put a Band-Aid on our symptoms for the rest of our lives.
Future Optimist.
That's pretty profound. And you have quite an unusual arc here in America. I know that you've spent much time in Canada, but we love a comeback story. And what is more interesting than somebody who's an enforcer in the NHL for so many years, with many impressive stats to your name, I should add, leading the NHL in your opening season with penalty minutes suspended 10 times in as many seasons. You had quite a different start to your career than where you've ended up now, which is just truly fascinating. So describe to me how you made the journey from being an enforcer in that world to this next world, which is something that I know you're an advocate for in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Canada, when I was 4 years old, we started hitting at a very early age. That's obviously changed now with what we know about concussions. But I was taught to play the game very hard and to take somebody's will to touch the puck away. And then once that happens, everybody sees it and everybody gets a little bit more confident and the goals start to pour in and essentially you're winning the game. And I moved away at home from 15 years old. I was drafted at 17. So I was in high school when I was drafted to the NHL and I turned pro right as soon as I graduated high school. And I was never a fighter, but I viewed it as one of the things that I could put on my resume where I could stick up for myself, my other teammates, and I could change the momentum of a game. And so I took that upon myself and I really just fell into the role. I did really well at it, started beating a lot of guys up. So I got known for it. Once you get known for it, then you have to answer the bell. And that brought on, I did it 164 times over a 12-year pro career, 10 in the NHL. And obviously took some damage, gave a lot of damage. And I was left with a lot of symptoms that I didn't really understand, that the league wasn't necessarily educating us on. And that really forced me into making a decision after I had my first child in 2014 to either keep playing or walk away from the game. And at that point, I'd won 2 Stanley Cups, had 100 points in the league. 10 years is a long time to be riding a plane and playing in over 500 games. So I knew that I was ready. And that's really when the real fight started to happen because there's really nothing in the way of curative measures for people with concussion-related symptoms. And I was getting told, like a lot of other collision sport athletes, that I had CTE and that it was incurable and to donate my brain when I die so they can figure out how to cure it later. And I just didn't believe it.
That's a fun thing to hear.
So,
it's hopeless for you,
brutal.
But donate your brain. That's the best we got for you. Medicine.
It's brutal.
Always winning.
But yes, I understand that, Ross. We have to understand it.
Yeah.
But I was like, I just didn't believe it, that there was nothing that I could do. Spent about $500,000 of my own money from 2015 to 2019. And then, as God would have it, it was $30 worth of mushrooms in Denver, Colorado, where it was decriminalized. And that brought me back within 6 months.
That's where I was born.
That's it, man. And it brought me back within 6 months, this thing from nature. And then now, the war on drugs and all of this stigma associated with some of these medicines, we thought that it made our brain bleed. In fact, it reignites areas of our brain that may be shut down from emotional trauma like depression or physical trauma like concussion. And so it's a really exciting time for medicine and for healthcare. And that happened to me, that was almost 5 years ago. So I've been using my platform and trying to tell people about this because if you have a desire to see what's wrong with you and you really want to change, then this medicine can really repurpose your life.
It's something I wholeheartedly believe in. So it's great to have you here because that's something that I maybe can't go on the record saying this, but there were times, let's just say a certain person that we know believed that nobody should be able to graduate from college without having taken this substance. Anyways, I think there's a lot of work to be done because the change is so profound for so many people, it's hard to ignore. And to witness that change in many different ways, it's hard to ignore. What you're describing is coming back from a physical condition, which is interesting because usually people talk about the mental change. How do you see it as being able to help people physically with things that may not have been possible to cure before?
So I was listening to doctors when I was going to these stroke rehabilitation centers, when I was paying $1,500 cash with no insurance reimbursement a day. And what they were telling me was that they can wake up areas of my brain that were shut down due to trauma, and through diagnostics, QEEGs, which measures the electrical wave of how our different brain hemispheres are communicating. We have 6 different hemispheres, as well as blood work, as well as memory tasks, etc. Language lives in a very specific part of our brain. But essentially what they were saying was that they can identify where I was most hurt, which was my lower right cortex, and then they could wake that back up by doing these ocular exercises, eye exercises, vestibular, balance is usually off. And I thought that sounded great, but I was 2.5 years into that, a lot of money in the hole, and I couldn't keep going to these intensive week-long programs and then expect to live my life. So I really started to question if this was working for me. And then I started to read PubMed papers and studies that were coming out on some of these emerging medicines like psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. I saw a study from the Imperial College of London in 2017 where the right and left brain hemispheres were communicating under fMRI and had never been seen before. And I just had a thought, like, this might be able to work for me. This might be able to be a medicine that these doctors said that they could do for me during these exercises. And I took diagnostics before I left, and then 6 months after, and 5 years later, I still have no brain abnormalities. I feel better than I've ever felt in my life. Obviously, I'm not taking hits and these sorts of things, but I'm more present in all of my relationships. I'm more present in my business, in the decisions that I'm making. I'm much more calmer. I'm enjoying life a lot more. I'm a lot happier. I can sleep better. And I used to have a lot of impulse control issues like most concussion survivors, and those don't exist in my life. It's really improved a lot of aspects of my life.
That's such an amazing story. And there are these documentaries, the stories are coming out also in football, of course, and hockey, about what are the long-term effects of these concussions. And even some people believe that, perhaps not getting into conspiracy theories or anything like that, but that O.J. Simpson's erratic behavior later in life might have been in part caused by this. There's no end to the theories, or even murderous tendencies or violent tendencies. There are many different ways that this could potentially impact somebody. So it's fascinating to see that in your personal life, it has had such a profound impact.
I don't think so. Conspiracy theorists, yes. Can you attribute murder to being hit in the head? No, but what I think you can attribute some of it to, like Aaron Hernandez, etc. They did a study on women who survived domestic violence in jails. They all had a history of TBI. 80% of them, not all, 80% of them had a history of traumatic brain injury, and in the jail system. So what I think you can equate it to is not being able to make the right connections, to make the right decisions, we all have weird thoughts, I'm sure, but most of us are able to say, hey, if you do that, this will happen. You'll go to jail. You'll get in trouble. You'll lose your family. I think that those aspects of the second, third, fourth thoughts may be shut off, but it's definitely not too far off from the truth.
Wow. Yeah, I have more weird thoughts than most, I'm sure, which this whole show is living proof of that. Clearly, I struggle with impulse control. Everything is a bad idea. But what I'm fascinated by, because obviously hockey is so big in Canada. It's a completely different culture, basically born with skates on. I'm aware of how important it is in Canada. When you talk about the samurai mentality of old, there was this belief in samurai culture that you put it all on the battlefield, so to speak. You fight as hard as you can, and off the battlefield, you feel nothing. You leave it all out there. In that time, was it something that you felt, was it just part of the game, being enforced, being so rough? Was that something that was just part of your role professionally, or was it something that you really embraced? Did you struggle with aggression at that time, or was it just, no, this is just what it is, but afterwards I hit that guy in the face, but I could just go have a beer with him and we're cool?
So we could do that. You usually got along with the guys that you fought the most, right? We were most alike. But I was enamored by the game from an early age because it had a different rule set. We seem somewhat similar in the way that I don't view this world the same way that maybe 95% of people view it. I have different thoughts and I love philosophers like Alan Watts, but I also have a pretty big dog in me that wants to beat other people. And when I came to this game at 4 years old, I thought it was amazing that I could just leave the whole world behind outside of this world in school and relationships and friendships. And I got bullied a lot when I was younger because I played double A and not triple A, and we all have our things, but I was able to leave all of that and then be as aggressive as I wanted to be when somebody was touching a little rubber puck. And I also really like the fact that you can work with a team within a team aspect, bring a different skill set, and then achieve a goal with 22 other guys. So yes, I really liked it. There was trauma that had happened to me when I moved away from home. There's a lot of hazing and abuse. So I can see that this alter ego, if you want to call it Carbomb, who is in the NHL, who fought 164 times and fought 3 times his whole career up until then, was really just this young kid dressed as a man trying to make his way. And did I like taking numbers and stealing hearts, for example? I did. I really did. And there's still a part of me that doesn't necessarily want to do that when I'm in business, but if I'm forced to, then I will act. And I just relish the fact that I could stick up for myself, that I could stick up for other teammates. I really like holding people accountable for their actions. And if somebody wants to go after one of my skilled guys that doesn't fight, they're going to answer to me. And sometimes I wouldn't fight. I would cross-check you in the throat. I would do things that were very unpredictable, but that's why teams liked me, because that was a really big part of the game. And if others feel more comfortable who are skilled on your team, then they're going to perform better. And we talk about hockey, I'll finish on this point. At the end of the day, the playoffs are going on right now, and it's a 7-game series. And you have to win 4 of those series to win the cup. It's one of the hardest things to do in life because you're so beat up after it. And so at the end of the day, take fighting out of the game. It's the will to play. It's the will to go through. It's the will to bust through pain. It's the will and the want, because we don't get paid a lot of money in the playoffs. If you win less than $200,000 a guy, it's not like you're winning millions of dollars. So it's really about the glory and about how big is the wall that you're willing to go through? How thick is it for the other guy? And I really liked that, man. I really loved that team aspect and that mental battle, because it is a mental battle.
What a great story. So what was your first experience with psilocybin after your hockey career?
Yeah, therapeutically. So you can do it recreationally, right? Which I did a few times, like at keggers and stuff like that. But therapeutically, in a big dose with a controlled set and setting, a set mindset, like an intention that I wanted to recover my brain health. And then the setting was, there was music, there were guys there that had done it before that helped guide me through it. But yeah, in 2019, that was the first therapeutic dose that I'd ever experienced.
Wow. So that's fascinating to me, because one of the hallmarks of taking psilocybin, for anybody who has gone down that path, is a profound changing of priorities. You mentioned things that are now important to you that maybe weren't so important to you prior. Did the concept of chasing after a little puck at all costs, did that become less important to you? Did you realize, hey, maybe there are other things? Because I've certainly had that in my life. Things that I took for granted in a younger part of my life fell away. A lot of the stuff that we thought was important, not so important. And then it turns out there's this other category of stuff that is much more important. For me personally, human connection being probably number one. And appreciation of the environment and the world that we live in. Just stepping outside nature and realizing the incredible beauty of all that is around us all the time that we just walk past without even looking at every day. Do you feel that your priorities have fundamentally changed?
Yeah, it really shook up the snow globe, so to speak. I was so disconnected to myself and to other people around me, especially my family. I had 3 kids at this point. And I remember waking up the next day, and I describe it as feeling the way I should. I was dealing with slurred speech, headache, head pressure, insomnia, impulse control issues, brain fog, brain fatigue, on top of anxiety, depression. And I was very suicidal for 3 to 4 weeks before I left. And immediately all I wanted to do was call my wife and my kids and see them on FaceTime and apologize to them, because I had a lot of shame and guilt associated with what I put my wife through, and people just didn't want to be around me, and I wouldn't want to be around me. And so I isolated a lot. And all of a sudden I had this feeling that I could apologize and then be a participant in this family and be responsible. And I was happy about it. It wasn't a drag to be around them. And so that was only day one. Light sensitivity, slurred speech was gone on day one. And then all these things started to fade away or lessen in intensity. And I really felt like I had been given a second chance, so to speak. And I knew that nothing gets fixed in 5 hours, but I had to mend some relationships. And it takes a lot of time, right? A lot of her friends knew me as the guy who had a couple drinks at the party, and then all of a sudden he was a different person, and nobody really wanted to be around me. And that started to change and shift. And fast forward 5 years later, obviously, then everybody's asking me, how do I get better? How do I use this in my everyday life to be as productive and the best father I can be, the best friend, the best husband? You talk about nature and who we are and why this mushroom that comes from nature fits into a receptor that heals the brain and body and spirit. And we can go down that road, and we are intricate beings. Right? We are very complicated and complex, but so is nature. And this whole world, I truly believe that we are born, like Alan Watts says, this isn't, but I truly believe this, we aren't born into it, we are born out of this world. Similar, in one of his talks, he talks about an apple tree appling the world peoples. And I love that line and that type of thinking, because
we're the blossoming. Yeah. Same.
Yeah, man. And me and you are just a reflection of a being. And those types of things, I can't have too many of those conversations with too many people, but it's nice to sit across from somebody that understands that sort of message.
Yeah. Is it communicating with me? Is it a higher intelligence communicating with me? Is it possible to communicate in such a way? The interconnectedness of all things, how all things, plants, animals, trees, us, people, the total interconnectedness, not just as an abstract philosophical concept, but as an immediate and visceral and readily apparent thing. In some sense, I think all people are aware that we're all part of the same thing, in some sense, but it's not hitting you in the face day by day with, yo. It's all connected. And for me, the connection with ancestors, or thinking about the past, the future, the stuff that my grandparents did for me, and appreciating that in new light, and just a recontextualization of so many elements. And on paper, you might say that anybody might know one of these things. Hallmark knows these things. It's on greeting cards. But how many people live their lives like they know these things? How many people live their lives like their family really is the most important thing to them versus their job or their career or their status or the car that they drive or any of these things that I presume you know are utterly meaningless? I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that you believe that if you're here talking about this and if you're advocating for it. So yes, I also like talking with about other people.
I think Wayne Dyer put it like amazingly in one of his talks. He mentioned that there's a knowing, and then there's your knowing, your innate knowing, and then there's your belief system. And your belief system comes with doubts. And your knowing, the things that you do, the experiences that you have, this innate feeling it in your gut, so to speak, comes with no doubt. Your intuition. And the reason that I really love this medicine is because it sharpens your intuition, and it kills self-doubt, and it makes you more confident, and you just innately know what to do and the right thing to do. And regardless of if it's going to make you a lot of money or not, it's just the thing to do, and you move through life effortlessly. But you have to go through those experiences, right? And you have to. And the last point that I really love, he's like, where the fear is, that's where you have to go. That's the breakthrough. And man, we lost so many games. I lost so many games in hockey, like growing up, way more than I won. But I was so obsessed with winning, with seeing the look in somebody's eyes and getting, I'm stronger than you. We're going to do this. Just busting through the fear is something that, I try to emulate that in my businesses, because obviously the unknown is everywhere. And that's where we got to go. Easier said than done.
Wow. So good. Yes, always easier said than done. I can appreciate in a concrete sense that you've been an advocate for many of these treatments. Obviously, psilocybin, if I had to pick one that I believe in most, that would be the thing that I would personally say I believe in the most. But still, exciting things in MDMA therapy, exciting things in ketamine therapy. There are many explorations with these types of substances that I think we need to do, that science is bearing out, medicine is bearing out. Obviously, you've been responsible for millions in funding into various studies along these lines. And one of the coolest parts, aside from your general life arc, which of course anybody who would know me would know that I'm going to love, what I find so fascinating is the concept of real estate as it relates to furthering these types of treatments, because that's a kind of connection that's not readily apparent to the average person. That facilitating this is also in part done by the setting that you create or don't create. So how did you come to the realization that the physical location was something that you could advance to help advance these treatments?
It's a great question. I owned and operated 2 psychiatrist-led clinics in Illinois, and then we expanded to a third. But the way that I started the business was because I patented with my own personal money this method of use with psilocybin to get better from a concussion-related symptom. So I took some money from the drug development program to expand this clinical footprint and obviously pay salaries, et cetera. But taking the money from that program was a huge burden. And I ended up having to, a little bit early, but we got to a pre-IND meeting, sell the drug development program to a NASDAQ-listed company. But in doing that, I talked to one of my investors, Cody Chandra, who said he's a capital markets guy, which I am not, and I never want to be. And he said one of our best investments was a REIT called IIPR in the cannabis space, which is specialized real estate for these grow facilities that are hundreds of thousands of square feet. And I said, when we both said, why don't we explore, this is specialized real estate, right? Ketamine rooms do not exist in your classic psychiatrist office. The duration of a visit is usually 27 minutes. Now you're going into a clinic with depression and getting treated with ketamine, but you have to be there for 2 hours. And it has to be a dark room. So the set and setting, again, is extremely important. And then when you talk about long duration therapies, like MDMA and psilocybin, through the FDA, which is insurance reimbursable, you have to be in these rooms with 2 therapists, and you don't want to be walking somebody out in a hallway with different lighting if somebody has to go to a bathroom. So there needs to be a bathroom in these facilities, and there needs to be space. And it can't look like your regular doctor's office with the white walls, et cetera. There needs to be elements of nature and sound and sense. And so like really specialized, nuanced real estate. And we want to explore and help with access. The more clinics that we can help prop up with these physicians, the more people are going to get treated, and the more access will trickle down into kind of the lower income or middle class communities. So that's where the idea was born.
You bring up a really great point there, because if you watch documentaries, obviously in the 60s they did experimentation with LSD, and even in a more modern sense, the people who are on the forefront of psilocybin treatment, they're giving it in a pill form, in a very clinical, sterile, hospital-style setting. Often there are people with clipboards and doctor's coats just staring over the person, looking at them. It's just not very conducive to what you would describe as the ideal environment for taking the substance of psilocybin, which, again, I would probably classify as being out in nature on a beautiful sunny day, being amongst people who love you, being around people who care about you, feeling safe and always safe from outside forces, safe from any kind of oppression. These are the things that generally make for a good experience. And being in a cold, sterile, clinical room with a bunch of people looking over you who are not on this substance, judging you or taking note of everything, that's in many ways the opposite. And yet, despite all of that, people are still getting these breakthroughs, even in that not ideal setting, which speaks to the power of these treatments. But I'm curious what you've seen. What type of spaces do you build, and what makes an ideal space for you that's fundamentally better than a typical hospital room?
Yeah, so first of all, a lot of the treatment for the neck and up is pushed out of the hospital. A lot of treatments in general are now, you're going to your urgent care facility, right? So we are owning the properties around the hospital. And the typical ketamine room is usually like an 8x8 It's really dark. There's no windows in it. There's usually a zero gravity chair, and there's room for a nurse to come in and administer the Spravato, which is a Johnson & Johnson intranasal product, or the really good ketamine clinics out there are doing both. So half insurance and some cash pay. And the nurse hooks up the heart rate monitor and then administers the medicine and then leaves. And now she's able to monitor it closely from her office. And then there's a spillover room, so to speak, because somebody's out of the experience within 40 minutes to an hour. And then so as a professional in a clinic, you want to turn that room over. So there's usually a spillover room that somebody will stay for the next hour and then they'll go home. And that's short duration ketamine. That'll be true for DMT, which is 5-MeO DMT that sends people on a trip for about 30 minutes to 45 minutes. Shows really great efficacy for stroke and major depressive disorder as well. And then for the longer duration rooms, you need a bed, something that somebody can lie down on. You need room for 2 therapists when you're talking about MDMA for PTSD treatment. You want to have access to putting up the lighting, putting down the lighting. You want to have access to raising the music and not raising the music. You want to also have access to a washroom. It's a 6 to 8 hour duration that you're there. And the other thing that not a lot of people are talking about is that associated with the MDMA program, as well as ketamine, there's over 90 hours of talk therapy. So I want to understand as a physician, Ross is coming into me presenting PTSD. I want to know what happened to Ross, or at least get to know as much of his trauma as possible. And then, because that is going to come out innately in the ceremony, and this is why this works 72% of the time as a curative measure for PTSD, because you're able to dampen the fear response in the brain with MDMA. It works on the amygdala. And then Ross is able to talk about his trauma without the emotional spike. And then we're able to work through it so it doesn't govern Ross's behavior, perspective on life, and he is able to live without those shackles to that trauma. So it's a 12-week program, 3 administrations over the 12 weeks, the 90 hours of talk therapy, prep, and then integration. Ross talking to, if I'm your therapist, integrating those lessons into your life. And that's going to be true for psilocybin as well. And it's revolutionizing the way that we think about healthcare and managing symptomology. It's pretty amazing. I akin it to this. I saw this almost like a parable where people are jumping in at the top of the river, and then there's people at the bottom of the river just pulling them out. And then for whatever reason, the people are walking right back up the hill and just jumping in again. Instead of just constantly pulling people out of the river, let's go upstream and see why they're jumping in the first place. And I feel really blessed at 39 to be a part of something like this.
That's so incredible. And what you touched on is one of the most important things. Many people believe that the reason these treatments aren't more widely popular is because they're so effective in a single session or a single program. It's not like something you need to take it every day for the rest of your life. If you go off of it, like many pharmaceuticals we can name, if you go off of it, you're screwed. Many people report profound life-changing things with just one session, or like you said, it was one therapeutic dose that really completely flipped. And just for the sake of going on the record, is this something that you feel like you need to bring yourself back to, or do you feel like, I got it, the switch is flipped?
For psilocybin, I do. It wasn't a one and done. It wasn't a panacea for sure. But I've had years of damage, and so I've actually. Yeah, I haven't done a large dose in almost 2.5 years. And what I'm really excited about, and I was about to make a post after my ride, I was just thinking, I did an HBO special with Brian Gumbel, Real Sports, right after an ayahuasca journey. And there's many layers to this onion. But because this medicine is such a potent neuro-anti-inflammatory, and because it helps me figure out life problems. I'm not sick. I haven't been sick for 4 years. I don't identify as having a depression or PTSD or anxiety. But it helps me figure out where I need to be and where to put my energy if I can't figure it out on my own. And so that's where I am in my life. I'm not stuck, but I do need a little help to get over the hump on executing on an idea that I just know in my heart to be true. And also, I really like supporting other concussion survivors. And so we have 2 concussion survivors coming down. We're filming a follow-up to the HBO episode in Oregon, where it's a legal regulated adult therapeutic use framework for psilocybin. And we're opening up a clinic there. We're really close to getting something under contract. And I was talking about it today before this interview and did a little 4-minute. I just feel really blessed to be able to have access to something when I can't figure it out on my own and I know that it's good for me, to then go back in and not have fear of repercussion of being arrested and all the other things, because it is a federally illegal substance. And then I will say, if people like what we're hearing, Oregon's open for business, regulated frameworks, facilitators are trained. The service center has a license and knows how to set up the set and train you on the setting with the facilitator. Manufacturers, you can see their COAs, and it's grown to the mushroom is grown to a very specific, it's just grown to a specific standard.
Specification,
and then there's a testing facility as well. And then I will say there's 28 other states that have introduced a very similar legislation to Oregon. So although this is emerging and bubbling and new, it's progressing rapidly, which is really nice.
And bad news recently happened for Californians, the state in which I reside. We had a chance. We had a real chance, but somebody's presidential aspirations nixed that chance for us, at least for now. That was quite a bummer, but I know that it's not going to go away. It's a temporary setback. As more and more people figure it out, and as more and more people realize that contrary to the opinion of the 60s and previous generations, it's not an us versus them thing. It's not a counterculture versus culture thing. As more and more police officers and military veterans and people who have traditionally been on the other side of the fence experience the healing powers of these things for themselves and witness it, more and more people are going to get on board and realize, why should we all be suffering unnecessarily when there is a treatment out there? And just to think of what your own life might have been. You're 39 years old. What would the next 30 years of your own life have looked like without this treatment for you? And how many people like you or who have gone through even greater traumas? How many years of happiness and productivity are we getting back just by these new and exciting treatments? So I think it's awesome. And I'm very happy that you have made that change in your life. It's incredible, man.
Yeah, I thank you. And I don't think I'd be here, as sad as that sounds. And I'd be missing out on everything around me and my amazing children, and how beautiful it is to be a dad and to see them, and how simple life can be by just doing this. And then they laugh, and it's hide and seek, and that's what life is, right? It's here now, and then it's gone tomorrow. But they did, Scott Weiner's office, unless I didn't hear, but they did pass a bipartisan bill to allow regulated use. That was in April, just recently. And it passed 7-4, and it's going to the Senate Public Safety Committee now. So I haven't seen any news on it since, but yeah, I know Gavin, yeah, exactly. But he nixed it twice, and then you just take the decrim language out of it, and then now the state can make money. But think about that, man. Think about how, if this gets passed in Cali, think about what that'll do to the rehab industry there. Like pretty amazing to think about detoxing
it's
people off.
It's just a matter of time.
It is. Absolutely.
It's a matter of time. And it's not habit forming. I mean, just look at the stats. We know that there are drugs that are extremely harmful. That's obvious. And I don't think anybody is saying, yeah, all things are equal, all things are great. No, that's clearly not the case. If you look at the problem with opioids or fentanyl, there are serious issues. But if you look at the stats around psilocybin or any of the things you've described versus, say, alcohol, which is legal, it's just night and day. It doesn't make any logical sense. So it's just a matter of time, I think. People are going to wake up and they're going to realize, okay, we're all better off. And you're a big part of that. It takes people like you really seriously advocating for this to make that happen. So we need more.
Yeah, and appreciate it. And like a long period of time, right? I've been at this for 5 years. It feels like I just woke up yesterday from that trip and started. But there's nice groundswell. And to your point, yeah, if people are interested, go look at a study done by David Nutt. Alcohol is by far the most harm. And then mushrooms are at the lowest harm for ER visits across the UK and the United States.
And on your liver, essentially negligible. Somebody has equated it to perhaps equivalent to half of a beer, although I'm not even sure if that's true, but it's essentially negligible in terms of physical harm. But some people may debate that, but the stats are out there. Do your own research, as they say, as internet people like to say, do your research. I know you've got quite a lot going on, and I'm just very honored that you took a moment out of what is surely a very busy schedule to connect with me, and I really appreciate that we were able to go deep so fast. If there's one thing you want the listeners to do or to support, how can they assist you with your efforts, or what is an action you would like them to take?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I think what people can do, what I want people to do is, if this has sparked something in you, now go and do the research. So go to Johns Hopkins, and they have a psychedelic assisted center for consciousness. Tim Ferriss has donated a lot of predominant names, and they're really the ones who started picking up psilocybin in 2003 and started doing studies on smoking cessation, which it worked 80% of the time. They started doing studies on Alzheimer's. They did a study on terminally ill cancer patients, and they've done a study on major depressive disorder or depression, where after 2 doses, people for up to a year no longer qualified for having depression. So go check out these studies. Go to mushroomreferences.com if you're interested in learning about the clinical studies associated with legal mushrooms like lion's mane and reishi and cordyceps, and they all have neuro anti-inflammatory benefits. And make sure you go to, there's a great website, Psilocybin Alpha, which has, or Psychedelic Alpha, excuse me, which has a tracker of all of the legislation being introduced across the country. And if it's in your state, go and lobby and show up to these hearings. And after you learn and you want to get involved, push the politicians that we appoint to pass these things, because it saves so many veterans, first responders, all lives, all of those things and more. And then know that if you're suffering and you're hearing this and you then go read the research and then you want to access something as safe as mushrooms and effective, then look at Oregon. Go to my social media, Daniel Carcillo 13, and get in touch with us. I answer a ton of people all the time, and we can help get you access to this medicine and improve your life. So I appreciate you having me on, talking about this, because not a lot of people right now are. And yeah, man, I'll be in Oregon and California back and forth, and maybe we do something in person.
I would love that. Yeah, it's fantastic. Consider me an advocate. I will advocate for you in whatever way I can, because it's something that I deeply believe in. And again, yeah, just honored that you've taken the time. I'll continue to support. I'll let you get back to your family. Good luck with everything. I hope we can stay in touch. And yeah, with that, the official podcast is over.